Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Once again, the Banzuke is out, the Basho is coming up, and it's time to make us a fantasy sumo tier list. But first, don't forget to put sumospiffy.com gear on your Christmas gift tier list. Right now, we mainly sell mugs because Yuria creates the art to work with the shape of the mug, but we can get all kinds of stuff made. Shirts, prints and posters, notebooks, different kinds of hats, friggin' pillowcases. In fact, we just put Sleepy Onyasato and Takawaisho on some pillowcases and pillows too. The variety of items available is pretty wild. So, if there's a type of anything else you'd like to at least see our art on, even if you're not sure you'd buy it, let me know in the comments and we'll see what we can make look good. Cause we're not selling it if it doesn't look good. Come on now. Okay, on to the tier list. S tier, got a couple here this time. Onosato and Takeru Fuji. This one was probably easy to figure out if you've been paying any attention to the sport this calendar year. Onosato stuffed his one merely good basho down the memory hole and crushed everyone in September, except Wakataka Kage, en route to clinching the title and letting his guard down on day 15 against Abi. Just pick him everywhere, and if he slips, well, bad luck for us. And Takeru Fuji talked about hitting the Teppo pole 1,000 times a day since the end of September, which means he might be hitting dudes this time even harder than he did winning the title in March. Kaio showed he still has a potential weakness to opponents with high-end power and the fearlessness to go right after him, but at Maegashira 16, there aren't enough guys like that to stop him from being an almost certain title contender. S injury tier remains the same as always. Teruno Fuji, at time of recording, hasn't officially pulled out, but it's hard to imagine he'll partake considering the Yokozuna Council was unhappy with him taking shots in March and May and scrubbing out both times. I'd assume he'll be out unless we get clear word he intends on fighting. And Takayasu, as always, should crush at Maegashira 9 for as long as his back holds up, which isn't likely to be all 15 days. A tier, we've got Koto Zakura and Kirishima. Koto started strong in September before the back injury he suffered just before the tournament started causing him problems, so without word of further injury, I imagine he'll be back in form for November. With Onosato and Takeru Fuji running around, it seems like another basho he's not gonna win, but 10, maybe 11 wins seems reasonable. And Kirishima's always been A tier when healthy, which he showed beyond much doubt that he is with that 12-win run in September. Neck injuries are weird and can come back at any point, just ask Kinbozan, but Kiri should be a solid bet this time around. But where's Hoshoryu? Leading B tier this time, in fact. I have no doubt he can continue to get enough wins to secure his rank, but a few things are starting to trend against him. 1. Even though as far as I'm aware he doesn't have any acute injuries impeding him right now, he always seems to have some nagging issue or another holding him back. 2. Guys like Itami Fuji are showing a blueprint for how to beat him. Opponents who stay on the attack while not overcommitting into one of his throws are using tactics he still needs to figure out how to beat consistently. And 3, the return to health of Kirishima and the return at all of Wakataka Kage makes his life harder still. Koto Zakura's recent history shows he can lose a win or so per basho and still generally reach double digits, but Hoshoryu constantly hits 10 on the nose. That's gonna be harder now. Alongside him at B tier is Wakataka Kage. I don't blame anyone who saw Waka in September and thinks he should be a solid A tier guy, but bear in mind that before his injury, he rarely reached double digits while in the Joy. To be a reliable 10-win wrestler, he can't just be as good as he was before, he has to be better. I'm not making that call until he shows he can do it. And Hokuto Fuji and Meisei are pretty easy calls for B-level injury tier. Captain Faceplant only fought 12 of 15 days last basho and finished with 8 wins, so with 2 healthy knees he'd be a shoo-in for a winning record. But he clearly still has an active problem, so on the injury list he goes. As for Meisei, he's known to have back problems. I've said in the past that guys in his situation will hold up until they just can't, and considering how badly he struggled at Maegashira 6, it's certainly possible he's hitting that point. If his body holds up though, he should be able to dominate down at Maegashira 11. And yeah, that's only 10 guys and we're through B tier. Everything else is a mushy mess of nobody who looks like we can be confident in them for anything in particular. Well, time to eat our porridge. We only have one C injury tier guy, Endo, so let's get him out of the way first. Very simply, his knees looked gone as he slid out of Makauchi at the start of the year. For whatever reason, he seemed suddenly healthy and competing for the Juryo title in May and spinning a 10-5 record in July. September looked like a continuation given his 7-2 start, but his mobility fell apart after that. At Maegashira 7, even a reasonably healthy Endo may not be a given for a winning record, but I'd say he has very good odds. If he looks like he did at the end of September though, he's gonna get wrecked. C+ now. With so many guys at C level this time, I'm gonna go in order of quality, or in other words, how likely I think they are to get a winning record rather than by rank. At the top of the list though are still the highest ranked guys, Wakamoto Haru and Daisho. They remain excellent choices for scoring winning records, but a guarantee is too much. Daisho's coming off 2 straight 8-7 campaigns at Komusubi, and at this point, any Sanyaku tournament for him looks like he's gonna keep riding that 50-50 line. Wakamoto Haru, on the other hand, looked fantastic at Maegashira 3, but his schedule wasn't quite as tough as it could have been. He swung relatively unusual wins against Abi and Kotozakura, and Komusubi have the toughest schedules in sumo these days. I think he'll at least stick at Komusubi, but promising a winning record isn't something I feel comfortable doing under these circumstances. We got a couple more neighbors next with Abi and Atami Fuji. Abi, like some other guys, is highly dependent on whether he's got a good flow going, so as long as he has the whole Sanyaku on his plate, he's never a gimme for a winning record. But at Maegashira 3, he has the advantage of being unlikely to pick up extra challenging fights like a Sanyaku wrestler would, which should make a big difference. And Atami Fuji, as I'll get to in his breakdown, seems like he's very slowly getting more of a handle on how to fight at these ranks. While the wrestlers above him will make his life harder, the ones just below should prove a lot more beatable. Next C+ is Oho. I'm 1 foot back on the Oho bandwagon now. He's finally started fulfilling some of the potential a lot of people saw in him a couple years ago. He had a win against Kotozakura that I don't expect him to replicate, and another against Takakeisho, which, yeah, but he's capable of at least making that final jump from 1 East to Komusubi. I don't know if it'll be more funny or tragic if he does it on the first try, but Atami Fuji keeps spinning his wheels. His neighbor, Hirota Umi, also fits firmly in this category. Hirota Umi was, more than anyone else, someone I considered for B tier if only to slightly reduce the cluster at the C tiers. He got the full-on Komusubi treatment in September, having to test Takayasu and Nishikigi while sitting on just 6 wins, and as usual, he didn't have any bad losses. The only one you might want to criticize is the loss to Atami Fuji, since he normally dominates that matchup, but that was a case where Atami finally found a way to counter Hirota Umi's normal tactics. That happens sometimes. But he also seemed to lack a little bit of the pop that saw him accelerate out of the middle of the division, and he's surrounded by the strongest contingent of wrestlers we've seen in the top 3 Maegashira ranks since, arguably, the start of 2022. A year ago, he'd have looked doomed. Now I think he'll be okay, but there's a lot of 7-9 win looking guys at these ranks. At this point, it might seem like I'm just shuffling the top guys before I get to the lower ranks, especially with Tobizaru at Maegashira 5. He should be a great pick, right? A decent pick, sure, but I don't know if he's much more than that. The reason, simply, is if that Terano Fuji doesn't fight, there's only 7 active Sanyaku. That means the joy effectively goes all the way down to Tobizaru. So, where in most tournaments at this rank he would largely avoid the Sanyaku barring further injuries above him or a strong performance of his own, now we have to expect at least a few Sanyaku matchups for him. Plus, any injuries above him will just increase that number further. He's absolutely capable of running it on most of the guys in his neighborhood, so I still think he's better than 50-50 to get 8 wins, but getting bumped ahead of Koto Shoho might have been really bad luck for him. Speaking of guys who should be better than their rating here, we've got Gonoyama. Sliding this far, even though he's only at Maegashira 8, is purely because he's shown zero capacity for changing his approach to sumo. As of now, he seems more intent on winning with his face-first style, despite how many guys are able to evade and let him beat himself. He's such a beast that he should be able to get 8 wins at this level through pure physicality, but he can't be trusted for much more without a tactical upgrade. Next, despite his struggles in September, I'm putting Onokatsu here. It's a flip side of the Tobizaru argument. Granted, Takeru Fuji's gonna blast him into 2025 early, but other than that, he's surrounded by a bunch of very beatable guys. He finally started locking in his defensive style after a rough start to last Basho, and while it's not as effective against as many guys as he needs it to be, a lot of those guys around him should be vulnerable to it. If he can avoid becoming Shonen Umi and find some actual angles of attack, he'll be fine, but even if not, I think he's a better pick than most of the guys in his neighborhood. Ryuden, he's gonna fight a bunch of Juryo guys and he's always got a plan. He'll probably do okay. Meh. Then Takano Sho, Sadano Umi, and Tamawashi fill out the C+ tier. Takano Sho slips in because, outside the Joy, he tends more towards winning records, and in July he ran a 12-3 record from this exact rank. He's streaky, and the odds of getting on that kind of roll again aren't good, but he has to be at least a favorite for Akachi Koshi. Sadano Umi lands here on account of the fact that he tends to do a little better when a lot of promoted guys are on his schedule, which is likely a 12 West. And finally, Tamawashi's had 4 consecutive 7 and 8 tournaments, but 10 East was the last rank where he had a winning record, which was 8 and 7. He's as 50-50 as you get. Now, finally, we're at C-, starting with Mitakeumi. First off, he clearly does not have the stamina to fight to his full capacity for 15 days. When he's in the Joy, this makes him look awful, because he faces the toughest competition when he has the most energy, and as the schedule gets easier, his ability drops off. Sometimes guys look like they fade over the course of a whole tournament, but in Mitakeumi's case, the numbers show this is really true for him. Over the last 2 years, since he dropped the Sekiwake, he's had 6 tournaments in the Joy and 6 outside of it. When he's in the Joy, over the first 8 days, he's a combined 16 and 32. Over the last 7, he's 15 and 27. He struggles at full strength against the best competition, and then continues to struggle at reduced strength against lesser competition. When he's outside the Joy though, he's a combined 30 and 18 over the first half of those bashos. Over the second half, he's only 19 and 23. So, at 7 West, this should be a tournament where he's more likely to start strong and hopefully let that carry him to a winning record. And initially, I had him as a good C+ pick. The reason I've dropped him to the top of this tier now is that he's got a lot of tough guys around him that he'll fight in the first half of November. On paper, I do not like a lot of these matchups. This rank is a little bit of faith in him coming up with enough ways to win, but I've nudged him to C- because 6 and 9 feels a bit more likely than 9 and 6. He's not a bad pick, just a more risky one than usual at this rank. Midori Fuji now! Yet again, I love watching him fight. I think he's great fun, but too many guys have started to figure him out. More to the point, too many big guys are figuring out how to collapse on him without giving him a chance to use his tactics against them. I want to see him face Asakoryu at least, but that doesn't matter. Less than 50-50 to get a winning record by just a bit. Alongside Midori Fuji, we've got Shodai. I promise I'm not being a hater. This is a high C-, like 45-55 odds of a winning record. But he's got everybody who beat him on his plate again, and he ran September from 4-4 to 10-4 on the strength of 6 opponents who finished with losing records. Now, at Komusubi, his definite strength of schedule will spike, and on top of that, he'll almost certainly be called on to face anybody, Takeru Fuji, contending from the lower ranks. Unless he genuinely regains the form that got him to Ozeki, 8 and 7 will be a good outcome and 9 and 6 will be great. If he gets frustrated though, this might be a disaster. Just to have it said, the next several guys all fall into a very similar category, roughly 30 to 40% chance of getting a winning record. Any of them could have 1 or 2 close fights make their bashos look very good or quite trash. So, if you think one should be above another compared to what I have here, that's absolutely fair and reasonable. So, let's start with Roga. After a somewhat rough start to his Makuuchi career, Roga's learned how to put his power to work and hang in with the rest of the division. But the way sumo goes, there's a point where you're not able to get all those wins anymore, and I think Roga's probably there right now. Who he pulls towards the end of the tournament will do a lot to determine his final record, but early on he'll likely see a lot of guys who can physically match him. Another 8 and 7 would be terrific, and it's certainly possible, I just don't think it's likely. Now, finally we get to our cherished Pinky Boy. This is actually a lot better than I usually think he'll do when he's in these top couple ranks, but he's got some factors in his favor here. For one, without Teru, the Sanyaku's only 7 deep, which means overall a less taxing schedule. Also, he doesn't do too badly against Kotozakura and Hoshoryu, and does quite well against Shodai. The other 4 Sanyaku tend to whoop his ass mercilessly, so a winning record is definitely not likely, but it doesn't appear hopeless by any means. Kota Shoho started out quite well in September, running to a 5-3 start, and 4 of his 8 losses were to Sanyaku opponents. However, His only really solid win was over Wakataka Kage, who he absolutely owns for some inexplicable reason, and as with Tobizaru, he's not as safe from the Sanyaku this time as his rank usually is. Common wisdom says that a Rikishi's life should get easier if he goes down in rank, but in this case, I think he'll need to be better than he was in September to get a winning record. It's possible, but I wouldn't bank on it. Ichi Yamamoto. The logic here is similar to Kota Shoho. He's coming off a 7-8 record and going into a situation that, like Kota Shoho's, doesn't seem like it'll be any easier than last time. Chiyoshima came in hard in July, considering he missed the first 5 days after hernia surgery, so he's hardly doomed either. But I'm not laying great odds on a mobility-reliant wrestler who lost September matches to Daiamami and Tsurugisho. And Takara Fuji is here simply because if anything feels like it's going wrong, he doesn't have to go super hard to maintain his spot in the division. This placement is based on the assumption he'll be cautious, not so much that he's incapable of hanging here. Now these last two guys at C- are definitely below the rest. I'm not holding Nishiki Fuji's ultra lucky September placement against him. Simply put, most of his wins in the last couple bashos have been against guys who are either too hurt or not good enough to be in the division. With that in mind, the number of promotees who look like they'll be overmatched should be a boon, but there aren't enough of those to carry him through considering everyone else he'll have to fight. And Toki Hayate should maybe be D tier, but in this case, his fellow promotees are what give him any chance of a winning record at all. In his one Makuuchi Basho back in May, his 6 wins all came against guys still in the division, which is a good sign. The question becomes whether or not his struggles were because of nerves or something more fundamental, like his size. And his size definitely didn't do him any favors in May. At 15 West, I think he's got a decent chance of staying in the division in January, but I think it's much more likely he does so at a lower rank rather than a higher one. And on we go to D tier. This is pretty straightforward. I've continually underestimated Chura no Umi, so I thought real hard about it before placing him here, but the fact is, 4 East is a full Sanyaku schedule rank, and the nearby Maegashira wrestlers aren't going to give him too many wins either. He's taken 2 straight off Wakataka Kage, but at some point Waka will figure him out, and Chura's straightforward face pound style is the type high-level guys tend to handle. I had Oshoma at C- for a while, but the Sanyaku schedule also drops him to D. He may not pull the full Sanyaku this time, but he should get the vast majority at least, and he has very little experience facing guys of that level. His only win against any of them was in May against Shodai, but Shodai went 7-8 at rank 9 in that tournament. I don't like his odds against the Shodai we saw in September. When a best case scenario is 7-8, you are D tier. Rounding this out, we've got Shishi, Asakoryu, and Bushozan. The 2 promotees aren't guaranteed to look awful, but when Shishi gets off his form he looks real sloppy, and it doesn't help that Toki Hayate was the only reasonably challenging opponent he beat in September. Asakoryu, I want nothing more than to be wrong about putting him here. I am genuinely picking him to hit maybe 7 wins at best, and still rooting for him to do much better. If there were a lot of immobile guys at the bottom of the division, I'd like his chances a lot more. But the only guy who he might be able to truly outmaneuver is Hokuto Fuji. It doesn't look good. As for Bushozan, the plain Meatballs Miracle run, by which I mean going 8-7 in July and starting 4-1 in September, got pounded out in the most emphatic way imaginable. All respect to him, he has his style and he employed it to the best of his ability for the whole basho in September. But the best of his ability is Juryo level, and 8 wins will require another miracle. That's it for D tier. Now you might be saying, hey, you forgot a couple of guys. In fact, they're part of a whole new tier I just created and which I may never use again, called Who Fucking Knows? Let's welcome Nishikigi and Shona no Umi to this new tier. Hello, gentlemen! So what's the deal with this tier? Very simply, who fucking knows what they're gonna do? Usually guys who can be described this way go in an injury tier because they can hit a certain level when healthy, but their health is completely questionable. This goes a step beyond that. Nishikigi won almost as many matches in September as in the last 3 bashos combined. That's really hard to do for someone who fought all 45 days of those other 3 bashos. The thing that makes him so impossible to predict is that, with no disrespect to those who deal with this for real, his sumo skills look absolutely bipolar. Look at this. At Maegashira 4, last May he started 1-6. he proceeded to run the table to 9-6, get bumped to Maegashira 1 East, and start 10-1 before he got shellacked by a bunch of other high flyers, one of whom incredibly was Shonen Naomi. After that, he went back to looking like the decent but hardly world-beating fighter he'd been for his whole career up to that point. He only had one winning record over the next year, an 8-7 at 5 West that Banzuke lucked him back to Komusubi, which started the run of 13 total wins over 3 tournaments. The 11-4 did have a bit of a lead up in that he started July 0-8 before finishing 5-2 and looking orders of magnitude better, but that was all the stranger. He looked like he was physically struggling at the start of July, and then it all went away for the next tournament and a half. I cannot begin to guess why this happens. If it was an issue of performance-enhancing drugs, he's clearly using them wrong if it only works sometimes and so drastically at that. If some medical factor is at work, it's more likely he takes some kind of painkiller that frees him to fight at his best, but he doesn't like to use it for some reason or another and only does it when he feels it's necessary. If that's the case, I imagine he wouldn't have a significant reason to use it sitting at Maegashira 6, so I'd lean against expecting a strong performance from him. But he's so all over the place that it's impossible to predict. And Shonen Naomi, good gods. Whereas I have an unlikely but not impossible guess for Nishikigi's lack of consistency, I have absolutely no clue what's going on with Shonen Naomi. He's fought 3 times at a double-digit Maegashira rank, going 10-5, 9-6, and 9-6, so I suspect he'll do pretty well this time. But after his 4-11 in January with the suspected flu, he looked even worse in September at almost the same rank with no explanation or apparent reason. Nothing looked different, he just couldn't do anything. Even his wins were sad. He basically fell on a malfunctioning Meisei, beat Midori Fuji for the 4th time in 5 fights, and beat a Kinbozan who looked like a marionette with most of its strings cut. He had nothing for anyone else. I grant that his schedule was a lot harder than it should be now, and that alone might propel him to a good performance, but September was such a baffling display of incompetence that with no injury news coming out about him, it's almost impossible to know what he'll do in November. Maybe he just realized he's in a stable with Ryuden and got really depressed. It's as good an explanation as any. Who f***ing knows? And that is the Kyushu 2024 tier list complete. As always, let me know what particular brand of idiocy I've employed this time in the comments. The Atami Fuji breakdown continues apace, and I want to have that done ASAP, so hopefully we can get that out more than a day or two before the Basho starts. We'll see. Other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.